Most people don't feel overwhelmed because their lives are falling apart. They feel overwhelmed because their minds never get a moment of rest. A problem shows up, and suddenly it becomes the center of everything. You replay it while brushing your teeth. You carry it into every conversation. You lie awake at night, running the same thoughts in circles, hoping that if you think long enough, clarity will magically appear. But it doesn't, because thinking harder is not the same as thinking clearly. You don't lose energy because of the problem itself. You lose energy because your attention stays trapped on it. When your mind fixates on what's wrong, it slowly forgets how to move forward. Emotion takes the wheel. Perspective narrows. And even simple decisions start to feel heavy. If you've ever felt mentally exhausted without doing anything physically demanding, if you've ever noticed how one unresolved issue can drain your motivation for everything else, if you've ever told yourself, "I know what I should do," yet still feel stuck, this audiobook is for you. Not because you're broken, not because you lack discipline or intelligence, but because no one ever taught you how to manage your focus when life gets complicated. This is not a talk about positive thinking. It's not about ignoring problems or pretending everything is fine. And it's definitely not about forcing yourself to feel motivated. This is about training your mind to respond differently. Because here's a truth most people never stop to question. The problem is rarely the real threat. The way your mind reacts to it is. A mind that stays locked on problems contracts. It tightens. It feels smaller, weaker, and more helpless with every repeated thought. But a mind trained to look for solutions expands. It regains control. It shifts from emotional reaction to deliberate action. That shift changes everything. When you focus only on what's wrong, your nervous system stays on edge. Your body prepares for danger instead of movement, and clarity disappears. But when you focus on what can be done next, even if it's small, your system settles. Your breathing slows, your thinking sharpens, and momentum quietly returns. This audiobook is designed to guide you back to that state. Over the next 60 minutes, you won't be asked to solve your entire life. You won't be asked to make drastic changes or set unrealistic goals. You'll be asked to do something far more powerful. You'll learn how to interrupt mental loops that keep you stuck. You'll learn how to separate facts from the stories your emotions attach to them. You'll learn how to regain clarity when your thoughts feel crowded and loud. Most importantly, you'll learn how to train your mind to move toward solutions instead of feeding problems. Because clarity is not something you wait for. It's something you practice. And when your mind becomes clear, action becomes simple. Not easy, but simple. By the end of this audiobook, you won't feel like life suddenly has no challenges. But you will feel steadier, more grounded, more capable of meeting problems without being consumed by them. This is where calm replaces chaos. This is where focus replaces overthinking. This is where you stop asking why things are happening and start deciding what to do next. Let's begin. Chapter 1. Problems are not the enemy. Most people treat problems as threats, something to fear, something to avoid, something that must disappear before they can feel calm again. But that belief quietly creates more damage than the problem itself. A problem is not an enemy. It doesn't arrive to punish you. It arrives to reveal something about your environment, your habits, your decisions, or your current way of thinking. The real danger begins when your mind mistakes the presence of a problem for a signal that something is wrong with you. When that happens, clarity collapses. Instead of seeing a situation for what it is, your mind reacts emotionally. Tension rises, thoughts speed up, and the problem starts to feel bigger, heavier, and more personal than it actually is. This is where most people get stuck. They don't struggle because the problem is unsolvable. They struggle because they fuse the problem with their identity. They think, "This shouldn't be happening to me." Or if I were smarter, stronger, or more disciplined, this wouldn't exist. And in that moment, the problem stops being information. It becomes a judgment. But problems were never meant to be judgments. They are signals. A signal that something needs attention. A signal that something needs adjustment. A signal that there is a gap between where you are and where you want to be. That's all. When you remove emotion from the equation, problems become neutral. They don't carry meaning. They don't attack your worth. They simply point. Yet most minds are not trained to see them this way. From a young age, we are conditioned to associate problems with failure. Mistakes mean punishment. Struggle means weakness. Difficulty means you're behind. So when problems appear in adult life, financial pressure, relationship tension, uncertainty about direction, the nervous system reacts as if danger is present. The body tightens. The mind goes into defense mode. And instead of asking, "What is this showing me?" the mind asks, "How do I make this stop?" That shift changes everything. When your goal becomes escaping discomfort rather than understanding it, your thinking narrows, you rush, you overthink, you replay the same scenarios without resolution. This is why problems feel exhausting. Not because they require effort, but because emotional resistance consumes energy. A problem observed calmly takes far less power than a problem resisted emotionally. Think about this carefully. Two people can face the same situation. One feels overwhelmed, anxious, and stuck. The other feels focused, grounded, and decisive. The difference is not intelligence, it's not confidence, it's not luck, it's an interpretation. One sees the problem as a threat to their stability. The other sees it as a situation that requires a response. One collapses inward, the other moves outward. This audiobook is built on a simple but often ignored principle. A problem does not control your state. Your relationship to the problem does. When you treat problems as enemies, you fight them emotionally. When you treat problems as data, you work with them strategically. And strategy always outperforms emotion. Here is where clarity begins. A problem is unprocessed information. It exists because something has not been addressed, adjusted, or decided yet. Once you see it that way, the emotional charge weakens. Instead of saying, "This is ruining my life," you say, "This is pointing to something I need to handle." That single shift creates space. Space between the problem and your reaction. Space between emotion and action. Space where clarity can return. Most people never create that space. They react immediately. They spiral. They assume urgency where none exists. But urgency is often an illusion created by emotion. Clear thinking begins when you slow the moment down, not by ignoring the problem, but by refusing to let it hijack your nervous system. When a problem appears, your first task is not to solve it. Your first task is to stabilize your mind. Because an unstable mind cannot produce clean solutions. You don't need answers right away. You need calm first. Calm allows you to see options. Calm allows you to prioritize. Calm allows you to decide what actually matters. Without calm, every problem feels equal, and when everything feels equally urgent, nothing gets resolved. This is why emotional control is not a personality trait. It is a skill. A trained mind does not deny discomfort. It observes it. It notices the tightening in the chest, the racing thoughts, the urge to react, and instead of obeying those signals, it pauses. That pause is power. In that pause, the problem shrinks back to its true size. It becomes manageable. It becomes specific. It becomes workable. Most problems are not massive. They only feel massive when viewed through emotional distortion. Once emotion steps back, reality becomes clearer. You begin to ask better questions. What part of this is within my control? What decision have I been avoiding? What action, if taken, would reduce this tension even slightly? These are solution-oriented questions, and they cannot be accessed when the mind is busy defending itself. This chapter is not about minimizing your challenges. It's about reframing your relationship with them. You don't need a life without problems. You need a mind that doesn't collapse when problems appear. When you stop treating problems as enemies, you stop wasting energy fighting reality. You redirect that energy toward movement. And movement, even small, imperfect movement, restores confidence. Not because everything is solved, but because you are no longer frozen. In the next chapters, you will learn how to strengthen this ability, how to prevent emotional reactions from clouding your thinking, how to see problems clearly instead of personally. For now, remember this: problems are not the enemy. Effective mind is. And the moment you stop fighting the problem emotionally, you take the first step toward real clarity. Chapter 2. Why your mind loves problems. It may sound strange to hear this, but your mind is not trying to help you when it clings to problems. It is trying to protect you. Understanding this changes the way you see your own thinking. The human mind evolved to detect danger, not to create clarity. Long before comfort and stability existed, survival depended on one skill above all others: noticing what could go wrong. That wiring still exists. So when a problem appears, your mind doesn't ask whether obsessing over it is useful. It asks whether it feels familiar. And familiarity, even when uncomfortable, feels safer than uncertainty. This is why problems are so sticky. Your mind returns to them again and again, not because repetition solves anything, but because repetition creates the illusion of control. If you keep thinking, you feel busy. If you feel busy, you feel involved. And if you feel involved, you feel like you're doing something, even when nothing is actually changing. This is one of the most deceptive mental traps. Overthinking feels productive. Worry feels responsible. Replaying scenarios feels like preparation. But none of these guarantee progress. In fact, they often prevent it. Your mind prefers problems because problems are known territory. Solutions, on the other hand, require movement. They require decisions. They require the possibility of being wrong. And uncertainty makes the nervous system uncomfortable. So the mind chooses the safer option. Stay with the problem. This is why you can clearly see what's wrong in your life, but still struggle to take action. Seeing problems does not demand courage. Acting on solutions does. Another reason your mind loves problems is emotional payoff. Problems give emotions something to attach to. Frustration, anger, fear, and disappointment all need a target. A problem provides one. Without realizing it, people often become emotionally invested in their problems. They talk about them, they revisit them, they build stories around them. Over time, the problem becomes part of their identity. They are no longer someone facing a challenge. They become someone dealing with a difficult situation. This identity is subtle, but powerful. Once a problem becomes part of who you are, letting go of it feels like losing a piece of yourself. So the mind resists resolution, not consciously, quietly. This is why some problems linger far longer than necessary. The mind says, "At least I know this pain," and unknown improvement feels riskier than familiar discomfort. There is also a biological reason this happens. When you focus on problems, your brain releases stress hormones. Those hormones sharpen attention in the short term. They make everything feel urgent and important. That chemical intensity tricks the mind into believing something meaningful is happening. But prolonged exposure to stress shuts down higher-level thinking. Creativity decreases. Perspective narrows. Options disappear. So the very state you enter to solve the problem is the state that makes solutions harder to see. This is the paradox. The mind keeps returning to problems to feel prepared, but the longer it stays there, the less capable it becomes. Another pattern to notice is storytelling. The mind does not like incomplete narratives. When a problem appears, it immediately tries to explain it. Why did this happen? What does this mean? What will happen next? These questions are not neutral. They are loaded with assumptions. Instead of observing reality, the mind creates a story to make sense of uncertainty. And once the story exists, the mind defends it. If the story is negative, the problem feels permanent. If the story is dramatic, the problem feels overwhelming. If the story is personal, the problem feels like a verdict on your worth. And now the mind has even more reason to stay focused on it. Because questioning the problem would mean questioning the story, and questioning the story would mean admitting it might not be true. This takes awareness. Most people never pause long enough to notice this process happening. They assume their thoughts are facts. They assume their emotional reactions are accurate reflections of reality, but thoughts are habits. And habits can be trained. Once you understand that your mind is drawn to problems out of conditioning, not wisdom, you stop trusting every thought that demands your attention. You stop asking, why can't I stop thinking about this? And start asking, what does my mind gain by staying here? That question alone weakens the loop. Because the moment you see that fixation is a pattern, not a necessity, choice returns. You are no longer fighting your mind. You are observing it, and observation creates distance. This chapter is not about blaming the mind. The mind is doing what it was trained to do, but you are no longer living in an environment where constant threat detection serves you. You are living in a world where clarity, judgment, and calm decision-making matter more, which means the old programming must be updated. You don't need to eliminate problems from your life. You need to stop letting your mind treat them like home. The next time you notice yourself circling the same issue, pause and remember this. Your mind is not asking for an answer. It is asking for certainty. And certainty does not come from more thinking. It comes from deliberate action. In the next chapter, you will learn how to break this cycle by separating facts from the stories your mind attaches to them. Because once the story dissolves, the problem loses its emotional grip. And when that grip loosens, clarity has space to return. Chapter 3. Separate facts from stories. Most mental suffering does not come from what happens. It comes from what your mind says about what happens. This distinction is subtle, but once you see it, you can't unsee it. A fact is neutral. The story is emotional. A fact is something that can be recorded by a camera or written down without interpretation. A story is the meaning your mind attaches to that fact, and the mind attaches meaning instantly. Something goes wrong. A message isn't returned. A plan falls apart. A mistake is made. The fact is simple, but the story is loud. The story says, this always happens to me. The story says, I'm falling behind. The story says, this is proof that I'm not enough. And suddenly, a small event becomes a heavy burden. This is where clarity disappears. When facts and stories merge, your thinking loses precision. You stop responding to reality and start reacting to interpretation. Most people don't realize this is happening because stories feel true. They arrive wrapped in emotion, urgency, and familiarity. But truth and familiarity are not the same thing. The mind tells stories to protect itself from uncertainty. It would rather explain something quickly, even inaccurately, than sit with not knowing. So it fills in gaps. It assumes intent. It predicts outcomes. It exaggerates consequences. And because these stories happen fast, they feel automatic. But automatic does not mean accurate. Here's the discipline that changes everything. Learning to pause long enough to separate the two. Fact first, story second. Let's slow this down. A fact answers the question, what happened? Nothing more. A story answers the question, what does this mean about me, my future, or my worth? The problem is that the mind treats the second answer as if it were part of the first. Once that happens, emotion takes over. You feel anxious not because of the fact, but because of the story. You feel discouraged not because of the situation, but because of the meaning you've attached to it. And as long as the story remains unquestioned, the emotion feels justified. This is why people say, "I can't stop feeling this way." They're right. As long as the story stays intact, the feeling will stay too. Clarity begins when you challenge the story, not the fact. You don't argue with reality. You investigate interpretation. This is not denial, it's accuracy. When you separate facts from stories, problems shrink to their true size, not because they vanish, but because they stop carrying unnecessary weight. Here's a simple practice. When something triggers a strong emotional reaction, stop and write down exactly what happened. No adjectives, no explanations, just observable details. That is the fact. Then write down everything your mind is saying about it. All the assumptions, all the predictions, all the conclusions. That is the story. Most people are shocked when they do this for the first time. They realize how little of their stress comes from reality and how much comes from interpretation. The story often includes words like always, never, everyone, or nothing. These are signs of distortion. Reality is specific. Stories are broad. Reality is grounded. Stories are dramatic. Once you see the story clearly, you gain leverage. You can ask better questions. Is this story the only possible explanation? Is it the most useful one? Would I speak to someone else this way? These questions don't eliminate problems. They eliminate exaggeration, and exaggeration is what drains energy. Another important point: stories feel personal. Facts don't. The moment you hear yourself thinking, "This says something about who I am," you've moved out of fact and into narrative. That doesn't make you weak, it makes you human. But it does mean clarity requires training. A trained mind doesn't suppress stories. It recognizes them. It says, "This is my mind trying to make sense of uncertainty." Not, "This is absolute truth." That shift creates emotional distance. Distance creates calm. Calm creates options. Without that distance, every problem feels like a verdict. With it, problems become tasks. This is the difference between emotional thinking and strategic thinking. Emotional thinking asks, "Why is this happening to me?" Strategic thinking asks, "What information is here?" One drains power, the other restores it. You don't need to stop your mind from telling stories. You need to stop letting those stories run the show. When you separate facts from stories, you reclaim authority over your attention. You stop feeding unnecessary stress. You stop reacting to imagined futures. You stop arguing with interpretations that were never verified. This doesn't make you passive. It makes you precise. Precision is calm strength. As you continue listening, begin noticing how often your mind blends fact and story without permission. Not to judge it, just to see it. Awareness alone weakens the pattern. In the next chapter, we'll build on this foundation by learning how emotional control creates mental clarity. Because once stories loosen their grip, your emotional state becomes something you can influence, not something that controls you. Chapter 4. Emotional control creates mental clarity. Clarity does not disappear because you lack intelligence. It disappears because emotion takes the lead. The moment emotion rises unchecked, thinking narrows. Your attention tightens. Your options shrink. And what once felt manageable suddenly feels overwhelming. This is not a personal flaw. It is a biological response. When the nervous system senses threat, real or imagined, it prioritizes survival, not understanding, speed over accuracy, reaction over reflection. That is why emotional moments feel urgent, and why decisions made in those moments are often regretted later. Most people believe they must solve the problem first in order to feel calm. But the order is reversed. You must calm the mind first in order to see the solution. Emotional control is not about suppression. It is not about pretending you don't feel stressed, angry, or afraid. It is about preventing those emotions from hijacking your thinking. Uncontrolled emotion turns problems into emergencies. Controlled emotion turns problems into processes. Think about the last time you felt emotionally overwhelmed. Your thoughts were likely repetitive, your body tense, your breathing is shallow. In that state, creativity shuts down, perspective disappears, and even good advice sounds irritating or useless. That's not because the advice is wrong. It's because your mind is not in a state to receive it. This is why emotional control is foundational. Without it, no technique works, no strategy sticks, no solution feels accessible. The mistake most people make is waiting for emotion to pass on its own. They distract themselves. They avoid the problem. They hope time will soften the feeling. Sometimes it does. Often it doesn't, because emotion feeds on attention. The more you engage with it mentally, the longer it stays active. The more you argue with it, the stronger it becomes. Control begins with interruption. The first skill is recognizing when emotion is rising, not after it has taken over, at the moment it begins. This requires awareness of the body, tightness in the chest, clenched jaw, shallow breathing, racing thoughts. These are not signs of weakness, they are early warning signals. A trained mind notices them and pauses. That pause is not passive. It is deliberate. You stop trying to solve the problem. You stop replaying the story. You stop reacting, and you shift your focus to regulation. Slow the breath. Relax the shoulders. Ground attention in the present moment. This may sound simple, but simplicity does not mean insignificance. Physiological calm restores cognitive access. When the body settles, the mind follows. This is why calm is strategic. A calm mind can see distinctions. It can prioritize. It can separate what matters from what doesn't. An emotional mind cannot. This is where many people resist. They think, if I calm down, I'll stop caring. Or, if I don't stay emotionally engaged, nothing will get fixed. But emotion is not commitment. Intensity is not effective. In fact, excessive emotion often blocks resolution. Consider this truth carefully. No problem is solved at the emotional level it was created. Stress does not solve stress. Anger does not produce clarity. Fear does not generate insight. They only signal that something needs attention. Once the signal is received, it must be quieted. This is the discipline. You feel the emotion. You acknowledge it. Then you lower its volume, not by force, by choice. This is where control becomes empowerment. You are not eliminating emotion. You are leading it. Leading emotion means deciding when it speaks and when it listens. When emotion leads, it demands immediate relief. When logic leads, it asks for the next effective step. Both exist, but only one should be in charge. Emotional control also changes how you perceive time. Under emotional pressure, everything feels urgent. You feel rushed to decide, pressured to respond, forced to act immediately. But urgency is often a distortion. Most problems do not require instant action. They require correct action. And correct action requires space. That space is created through regulation. When you slow your response, you gain leverage. You stop reacting to imagined consequences. You stop defending against hypothetical futures. You start working with what is actually in front of you. This is mental clarity. It does not arrive suddenly. It returns gradually as emotional noise fades. And once it does, solutions appear more obvious than expected. Not because the problem changed, but because your state did. This chapter is not asking you to become emotionally numb. It is asking you to become emotionally skilled. Skill means knowing when to engage and when to pause, when to feel and when to think, when to wait and when to act. Without this skill, every problem feels personal. With it, problems become technical. Technical problems can be solved. Personalized problems feel endless. As you move forward, remember this principle. You do not gain clarity by pushing harder. You gain clarity by settling first. Control your state, and your thinking will follow. In the next chapter, we will build on this by learning how solution-focused thinking is a trainable skill, not a personality trait. Because once emotion is under control, the mind becomes something you can direct, not something you must endure. Chapter 5. Solution thinking is a skill. Many people believe that some individuals are simply better at solving problems. They assume it's talent or intelligence or confidence. And when they struggle to move forward, they quietly conclude that something is missing in them. This belief is comforting, but false. Solution thinking is not a trait you're born with. It is a skill you train. And like any skill, it follows a structure. Most people never learn that structure. They are taught to identify problems, analyze causes, and explain emotions, but not how to move from confusion to action. So when problems appear, they do what they know how to do. They think, they worry, they analyze, they wait, and they mistake that mental activity for progress. But solution thinking begins where overthinking ends. A solution-focused mind does not ask different questions because it is smarter. It asks different questions because it has been trained to. The first difference you'll notice is direction. Problem thinking looks backward. It asks, what went wrong? It circles around blame, regret, and explanation. Solution thinking looks forward. It asks, what can I do next? It does not deny the past. It simply refuses to live there. This forward orientation is not optimistic. It is practicality. A solution-oriented mind understands something critical. You cannot change what already happened, but you can influence what happens next. That understanding alone reduces mental friction. The second difference is scale. Problem thinking tends to magnify. It treats everything as large, complex, and overwhelming. Solution thinking reduces. It breaks situations down into the smallest actionable units. Not because the problem is small, but because progress requires traction. Most people wait for a big solution. They want clarity before action, certainty before movement. But clarity rarely arrives before action. It emerges because of it. This is why solution thinking always begins with a small step. Not the perfect step, not the final step, the next controllable one. This requires discipline. A disciplined mind asks 3 questions when facing any problem. What is within my control right now? What is the smallest action that reduces friction? What can I do today without waiting for motivation? These questions bypass emotional noise. They don't ask how you feel. They ask what is possible. And possibility restores agency. Agency is the antidote to helplessness. When you take even a small action, your nervous system receives a signal, I'm not trapped. That signal changes your state. Energy returns. Focus sharpens. Thinking improves. This is why action precedes clarity, not the other way around. Another core element of solution thinking is tolerance for imperfection. Problem-focused minds want certainty. They want guarantees. They want reassurance before moving. Solution-focused minds accept uncertainty as part of the process. They understand that action does not require confidence. It creates it. Waiting until you feel ready is one of the most common ways people stay stuck. Readiness is not a feeling. It is a decision. A trained mind does not ask, am I ready? It asks, is this direction better than staying still? If the answer is yes, it moves. This is not recklessness, it is momentum. Momentum teaches faster than contemplation ever will. Another overlooked aspect of solution thinking is boundaries. Not every problem deserves unlimited attention. Problem-focused thinking obsesses. It treats every issue as urgent and important. Solution thinking prioritizes. It asks, is this worth my energy right now? And what happens if I don't solve this immediately? Often the answer is surprising. Many problems lose intensity when attention is removed. They resolve themselves, they shrink, or they reveal that they were never as critical as they felt. A solution-oriented mind is selective. It knows that attention is a finite resource. Where attention goes, energy follows. Where energy follows, results appear. This means solution thinking also includes knowing when not to act. Sometimes the most effective move is to wait, to gather information, to let emotions settle. But waiting in solution thinking is intentional. Waiting in problem thinking is avoidance. The difference is clarity of purpose. Solution thinkers also understand feedback. They don't see outcomes as verdicts. They see them as data. If something works, they note it. If it doesn't, they adjust. There is no drama in this process. Failure is not a personal flaw. It is information about what didn't work. This mindset removes fear from action. When failure stops meaning I am incapable and starts meaning this approach needs adjustment, movement becomes easier. This is why solution thinking feels calmer. It is grounded in reality, not emotion. It does not require you to feel inspired. It requires you to be present, and presence changes how problems are experienced. Instead of feeling attacked by life, you feel engaged with it. You are no longer reacting. You are responding. That shift builds trust in yourself. Trust grows not from success, but from follow-through. Each small action reinforces a new identity. I am someone who handles things, not perfectly, not instantly, but consistently, and consistency compounds. Over time, problems stop feeling like threats. They start feeling like puzzles, not because they're easy, but because you know how to approach them. This chapter is about reclaiming that ability. You don't need a new personality. You need a new process. A process that moves you out of mental loops and into motion. A process that replaces overwhelm with direction. As you continue, remember this. You are not stuck because the problem is too big. You are stuck because your mind has been trained to stare instead of step. Train it to step. Clarity will follow. Chapter 6. Stop asking the wrong questions. The quality of your thinking is shaped by the quality of your questions, and most people ask questions that quietly keep them stuck. They don't realize it because the questions feel natural. They feel reasonable. They even feel intelligent. But they lead nowhere. When something goes wrong, the mind instinctively asks, why is this happening to me? It asks, why do I always end up here? It asks, what's wrong with me? These questions feel deep. They feel reflective. But they are traps. They turn attention inward in the wrong way. They invite rumination instead of resolution. They push the mind toward explanation, not movement. And explanation alone does not change outcomes. The mind loves these questions because they create a sense of engagement without risk. You can ask why forever without having to act. You can analyze endlessly without committing to a direction. This is why wrong questions are so dangerous. They feel productive while quietly draining momentum. Solution-oriented thinking begins when you learn to interrupt this pattern, not by forcing positivity, not by suppressing curiosity, but by asking questions that create leverage. The first shift is moving from why to what. Why questions tend to look backward. What questions look forward? Why did this happen? Keeps you in the past. What needs to be done now? Brings you into the present. The present is the only place where action exists. A solution-focused mind understands that insight without action changes nothing, so it trains itself to ask questions that demand engagement with reality. Here are some of the most common wrong questions people ask. Why can't I get my life together? Why does this always feel so hard? Why do other people have it easier? None of these questions contain a path forward. They invite comparison, they invite self-criticism, they invite helplessness. Now contrast them with better questions. What part of this is within my control? What is the smallest step that would improve this situation? What decision have I been avoiding? These questions don't feel as emotionally dramatic, but they are effective. They don't comfort the ego. They activate responsibility. Responsibility is not to blame. It is power. When you ask better questions, you change your relationship to the problem. You stop seeing yourself as someone things happen to. You start seeing yourself as someone who responds. This shift restores dignity. Another category of wrong questions revolves around certainty. People ask, what if this goes wrong? What if I fail? What if I make the wrong choice? These questions feel cautious, but they paralyze. They assume that perfect foresight is required before movement. But life does not work that way. No meaningful progress happens without uncertainty. Better questions accept uncertainty as a condition, not a barrier. Instead of asking, what if I fail? Ask, what would I learn if this didn't work? Instead of asking, what's the right choice? Ask, which choice moves me forward, even slightly? Forward movement corrects itself. Stillness does not. A trained mind understands this. It does not seek guarantees. It seeks direction. Another subtle but powerful mistake is asking emotionally loaded questions. Questions like, why am I like this? Or, why can't I be better? These questions assume a flaw before any evidence is examined. They frame the problem as a defect of identity rather than a challenge of skill or circumstance. This damages confidence over time. A solution-focused mind avoids identity-based questions. It does not ask, what does this say about me? It asks, what does this require of me? One weakens, the other strengthens. When you stop interrogating your worth, energy becomes available for action. Another critical distinction is between questions that expand options and questions that narrow them. Problem-focused questions are narrow. They close doors. Why is everything falling apart? How did I mess this up? Solution-focused questions expand. What options haven't I considered yet? What would this look like if it were slightly better? Expansion creates breathing room, and breathing room is essential for clarity. Under pressure, the mind tends to ask extreme questions. It jumps to worst-case scenarios. It treats temporary difficulty as permanent failure. This is why questions matter so much. They either calm the nervous system or inflame it. A question like, what's one thing I can do in the next 24 hours? Grounds you in time and action. It lowers the emotional temperature. It brings the problem back to human scale. This is not about tricking yourself. It is about precision. Precision in language leads to precision in thought. And precision in thought leads to effective action. One of the most important questions you can train yourself to ask is this: what am I avoiding right now? Avoidance often hides behind complex thinking, behind planning, behind research, behind endless consideration. But avoidance keeps problems alive. The moment you name what you're avoiding, the problem loses some of its power, because avoidance feeds uncertainty. And uncertainty fuels fear. Action, even uncomfortable action, restores clarity. This chapter is not about memorizing the right questions. It's about noticing the effect your questions have on your state. Do they lead you toward motion or stagnation? Toward clarity or confusion? Toward responsibility or resentment? You don't need to ask perfect questions. You need to ask useful ones. Useful questions point to action. They reduce emotional charge. They respect reality. As you continue through this audiobook, begin to listen to the questions your mind asks automatically. Not to judge them, just to notice them. Then practice replacing them with questions that serve you, questions that move you forward. Because when you change your questions, you change your thinking. And when your thinking changes, your relationship with problems changes too. In the next chapter, you'll learn how to train your focus like a muscle, so your attention stops drifting back to the same problems and starts supporting real progress. That training begins with awareness. Chapter 7. Train your focus. Like a muscle, focus is not something you either have or don't have. It is something you train or neglect. Most people believe their attention is naturally weak. They blame distraction, technology, stress, or lack of discipline. But the real issue is simpler. Their focus has never been trained with intention. Attention follows habit. Where you repeatedly place your attention, your mind learns to return. This is why problems feel magnetic. Once your attention locks onto an issue, your mind keeps drifting back to it, even when nothing new is happening. Not because the problem demands it, but because your focus has been conditioned to feed it. A trained mind understands this pattern and works with it instead of fighting it. The first step is recognizing that focus is finite. You do not have unlimited mental energy. Every moment you spend revisiting the same problem drains attention from everything else. This is why constant rumination feels exhausting. It is not the problem itself that tires you. It is the repeated redirection of attention to the same mental location. Focus training begins with awareness. Notice where your attention goes when you are not directing it. Notice which thoughts pull you in without permission. Notice how often your mind revisits the same concerns. This observation is not meant to judge. It is meant to reveal patterns. Once you see the pattern, you can change it. One of the most effective tools for training focus is containment. Containment means deciding when and where a problem is allowed to exist in your mind. Most people allow problems to roam freely. They show up during work, conversations, rest, and even sleep. A solution-oriented mind creates boundaries. It says, I will think about this problem at this time, in this way. And outside that container, attention is redirected. This is not avoidance, it is discipline. Without containment, problems expand to fill all mental space. With containment, they shrink. A simple practice is time boxing. Choose a specific period to think about a problem. Write, plan, decide. When the time ends, attention moves on. When the problem returns outside that window, you remind yourself, this has already been scheduled. This trains the mind to respect structure. Another powerful principle is starving what you don't want to grow. Attention is nourishment. What you feed grows stronger. What you neglect weakens. If you continuously feed anxious thoughts with attention, they become dominant. If you stop feeding them, they lose intensity over time. This does not happen instantly, but it is reliable. Many people make the mistake of arguing with distracting thoughts. They try to reason them away. They try to suppress them. This only gives them more attention. A trained mind does something simpler. It notices the thought and redirects attention without commentary. Not forcefully, calmly, just as you would gently guide your focus back when reading and realizing your mind has wandered. Focus is strengthened through redirection, not confrontation. Another key element is practicing deliberate attention on neutral tasks. People assume focus is trained only during intense work, but it is trained everywhere. When you eat, eat. When you walk, walk. When you listen, listen. Every time you bring your attention back to the present task, you reinforce control. This builds mental stability. A stable mind is less reactive. It does not jump from thought to thought seeking stimulation. It stays where you place it. This stability reduces the grip of problems, because problems thrive on uncontrolled attention. Another important distinction is between focus and fixation. Focus is intentional. Fixation is automatic. Focus serves a purpose. Fixation drains energy. Learning to tell the difference matters. Ask yourself, is this thought helping me move forward right now? If the answer is no, it does not deserve your full attention. This is not avoidance, it is prioritization. Solution-oriented focus asks, what deserves my attention at this moment? And the answer changes throughout the day. Another challenge many people face is mental residue. This happens when attention stays partially attached to a problem even after you move on. You are working, but not fully present. You are resting, but still thinking. This split attention reduces effectiveness everywhere. Clearing mental residue requires closure. Even small closure helps. Write the next step. Make a simple decision. Set a reminder. The mind relaxes when it knows something has been acknowledged and scheduled. Unfinished thinking is what keeps attention stuck. Focus training also requires patience. Your mind will drift. It always does. The goal is not to eliminate distraction. The goal is to notice it sooner and return faster. Each return is a repetition, and repetition builds strength. Over time, the space between distractions grows. The pull of problems weakens, and your ability to choose where attention goes improves. This is not dramatic. It is gradual, but it is powerful, because when you control your focus, you control what grows in your mind. You stop feeding anxiety with attention. You stop rehearsing worst-case scenarios. You stop reliving the same thoughts. And in that space, clarity emerges, not as a sudden insight, but as a steady state. This chapter is about reclaiming your attention, not to become rigid, but to become deliberate, because where your focus goes, your life follows. In the next chapter, we will bring everything together by exploring the identity of a solution-oriented mind, an identity that no longer collapses under pressure, but responds with calm, direction, and purpose. Chapter 8. Identity of a solution-oriented mind. At a certain point, understanding is no longer the issue. You may already know how to calm yourself. You may already recognize destructive thought patterns. You may already understand what needs to change. Yet under pressure, you still find yourself reacting the same way. This is because behavior does not ultimately come from knowledge. It comes from identity. When stress appears, you don't consult techniques. You default to who you believe you are. That is why lasting change happens only when identity changes. A solution-oriented mind is not defined by constant confidence or positive emotion. It is defined by an internal stance toward life. That stance sounds simple, but it is powerful. I'm someone who handles things. Not perfectly, not effortlessly, but consistently. This identity does not say, I should be able to deal with this. It says, I will deal with this. The difference is subtle, yet profound. Should creates pressure. Will creates direction. Most people unconsciously carry an identity shaped by past overwhelm. They see themselves as someone who gets stuck, freezes, avoids, or overthinks. And once that identity is accepted, behavior follows automatically. When a problem appears, the reaction is predictable. Tension rises, self-doubt appears, action is delayed. Not because the problem is too big, but because the identity underneath it expects collapse. A solution-oriented identity changes that expectation. It does not assume ease, it assumes engagement. This identity accepts discomfort as part of progress. It does not interpret difficulty as a sign to stop. It says, this feels uncomfortable because I am stretching, not because I am failing. That interpretation alone preserves momentum. Another defining feature of this identity is responsibility without self-attack. A problem-oriented identity often swings between blame and helplessness. Either everything is your fault, or nothing is in your control. Both extremes drain power. A solution-oriented identity stands in the middle. It says, "I didn't choose everything that happened, but I choose how I respond." This keeps responsibility grounded. You're not carrying the weight of the world. You're carrying only what is yours to carry. That clarity reduces overwhelm. Overwhelm comes from vague responsibility. Clarity comes from defined responsibility. This identity also reshapes emotional experience. Fear still appears. Frustration still arises. Doubt still shows up. But these emotions are no longer treated as commands. They are treated as signals. A solution-oriented mind listens without obeying. It acknowledges emotion, then asks, "What action aligns with who I am?" Identity becomes the anchor. This prevents emotional spirals. Instead of asking, "How do I get rid of this feeling?" you ask, "What does someone like me do next?" That question bypasses rumination. Another key aspect of this identity is patience. Not passive patience, active patience. The patience to take one step without demanding immediate relief. The patience to allow clarity to emerge through action, not before it. Problem-oriented identities demand certainty first. They want guarantees. Solution-oriented identities accept uncertainty as the cost of movement. They do not wait for confidence. They build it through follow-through. This identity also changes how mistakes are processed. Mistakes are no longer proof of inadequacy. They are information. Information about what needs adjustment. Information about what doesn't work. Nothing more. This prevents shame from taking root. Shame turns attention inward and freezes progress. Information turns attention outward and restores movement. A solution-oriented identity protects forward motion at all costs. It understands that stopping completely is more damaging than choosing imperfect action. This identity is also deeply practical. It does not romanticize struggle. It does not dramatize difficulty. It asks simple, grounded questions. What matters right now? What can I control? What is the next reasonable step? These questions become automatic because they are consistent with identity. You don't force them. They arise naturally. Identity simplifies thinking. When you know who you are, decisions become easier. Another important shift happens in how time is experienced. A problem-oriented identity feels crushed by the future. It tries to solve everything at once. A solution-oriented identity lives in sequence. One step, then the next. This prevents paralysis. You stop asking, "How do I fix my entire life?" and start asking, "What is the next correct move?" This shift restores calm. Calm is not the absence of problems. It is the absence of internal resistance. A solution-oriented identity reduces resistance. You stop fighting reality emotionally. You start working with it strategically. This identity is built slowly, not through declarations, not through motivation, but through repetition. Each time you respond instead of react, identity strengthens. Each time you take responsibility without self-criticism, it deepens. Each time you act while uncertain, it solidifies. These moments seem small, but they accumulate evidence. Evidence changes self-image. Over time, you stop wondering whether you can handle challenges. You assume that you will. That assumption changes everything. You approach problems differently. You speak to yourself differently. You recover faster. This does not mean life becomes easy. It means you become stable. Stability is the real goal, not control over circumstances. Control over response. A solution-oriented identity is not rigid. It is adaptable. It adjusts when needed. It learns quickly. It moves forward without drama. Drama feeds problems. Calm dissolves them. As you reach the end of this chapter, consider this carefully. When a problem appears, who do you become? Do you become tense and avoidant, or grounded and engaged? That answer has nothing to do with intelligence. It has everything to do with identity. And identity is not fixed, it is practiced. From this point on, you are not trying to eliminate problems. You are becoming someone who handles them with clarity. That is the true shift. Once that identity takes root, problems lose their emotional power. They no longer define you. They no longer intimidate you. They simply arrive, and you respond. Calmly, deliberately, one step at a time. Clarity is not something you discover at once and keep forever. It is something you return to again and again through practice. Throughout this audiobook, you've seen that problems themselves are not what drain you. What drains you is the way attention, emotion, and identity interact when a problem appears. When attention locks on to what's wrong, emotion rises. When emotion rises unchecked, thinking narrows. And when thinking narrows, identity collapses into old patterns. That cycle is what keeps people stuck. But you've also seen that this cycle can be interrupted. You learned that problems are not enemies, but signals. That the mind clings to problems not out of wisdom, but conditioning. That much of your suffering comes from stories layered on top of facts. That emotional control is not suppression, but leadership. That solution thinking is a trainable skill. That the questions you ask shape the direction of your life. That focus is a muscle, strengthened through deliberate use. And finally, that lasting change comes from identity, not effort alone. These are not abstract ideas. They are tools, but tools only work when they are used. The goal was never to eliminate problems from your life. That goal creates fragility. The real goal is to become stable in the presence of problems. A stable mind does not panic. It does not dramatize. It does not collapse inward. It pauses. It observes. It responds. This response does not require perfection. It requires engagement. One clear decision, one small action, one step forward. Over time, these steps compound. And as they do, something important changes. Your relationship with yourself. You stop seeing yourself as someone at the mercy of circumstances. You begin to see yourself as someone who can handle what appears. Not because you always know the answer, but because you trust your ability to find the next one. That trust is the foundation of calm. Calm is not the absence of difficulty. It is the absence of internal resistance. When you stop fighting reality emotionally, energy becomes available. When energy becomes available, clarity returns. And when clarity returns, action becomes simpler. Not easier, but simpler. As you move forward, you will still encounter uncertainty. You will still feel doubt. You will still have moments where your mind wants to spiral back into old habits. That is normal. The difference now is awareness. You will notice when attention drifts toward rumination. You will notice when emotion begins to lead. You will notice when identity starts to shrink. And in that noticing, choice reappears. You don't need to change everything at once. You don't need to apply every concept perfectly. You only need to return to one principle. Focus on what you can do next. That focus keeps you grounded. It keeps you engaged. It keeps you moving. Life does not become clearer because problems disappear. It becomes clearer because your mind learns how to relate to them differently. And that skill is always available to you. Whenever you feel overwhelmed, return to the basics. Separate facts from stories. Lower emotional intensity. Ask better questions. Take a small step. Clarity is built this way, quietly, consistently, without drama. This audiobook does not end your challenges. It changes how you meet them. From this point on, problems are no longer something to fear. They are something to work with. And you are no longer someone waiting for life to be easier. You are someone capable of thinking clearly, even when it isn't. That is the real outcome. And it is something you can carry with you long after this audiobook ends.